We'd like to thank our affirmative colleagues for their presentation. We have now our cross-examination 1 of the affirmative by the negative team. Federal spending should remain at current levels. The first question that we need to address is, does the Constitution grant the federal government authority over education? Well, no more so than the federal government has the right to dictate the minimum drinking age. Do we want 16-year-olds drinking and driving? Of course not. The federal government exerts authority over education under the Taxing and Spending Clause of the Constitution. Just like we have several other agencies that are not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, such as the FDA or the Environmental Protection Agency, we have the Department of Education, which has constitutional authority granted to it through Congress to provide funds to enhance and improve the education of students. Is Title I funding really not effective in improving outcomes, as our colleagues suggest? Well, studies of the efficiency of this program are not really conclusive. In terms of Title I, it's a funding source. It's not a program. So it's not something that you can easily study and keep track of and say something is working or is not working. And that's because schools are provided with funding, which they then in turn spend on multiple different ways of supporting students, whether it be class size reduction, whether it be extended learning or tutoring time, whether the schools decide to spend it on more professional development, or whether it's used for increasing funding to attract qualified teachers. So because funding is used for so many different purposes, it's really not something that you can study so readily. There isn't a randomized or non-trial that you can put one control group in and have another group and then say, well, let's see if this is going to make a difference or not. It's not that easy. And so the arguments that funding is not there are really not on par with what the reality is. Another discussion point was federal funding in higher education and the suggestion that maybe the government should not involve itself or limit funding in federal funding for education. Well, we would counter with, what about Pell Grants that we would provide to students who are from low and moderate incomes? Do we not provide that? Do we also not provide subsidized loans to students so that they can qualify to go to college? What happens if you don't have money to pay for college? Do you just not go? Does the United States really spend more on education? We really need to look and analyze that comment, because what we know is that our country is very different from many other countries. For example, if you compare us to Japan, we have a much more heterogeneous population. So it's not really an equal comparison, and it's something that needs to be considered.